Welcome back to another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. Today, I'm joined by a guest named Chase Warrington. He's a remote work advocate who's been living in Valencia, Spain for the past 5 years. Chase, how's it going, man?
Hey, good to see you, man. Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah, and you're calling in from Valencia right now, right?
Well, I'm up in Germany at the moment, but yeah, I've been calling Spain home for almost the last 5 years. So that's typically where I call La Casa.
Yeah, and I think you told me you were doing a little bit of travel for the rest of 22. What's the plan looking like?
Man, I'm excited. I came to Europe to get a feel for just traveling all the time and constantly taking advantage of cheap flights and trains and stuff on a longer stint than just coming in for 90 days at a time. And then, COVID promptly hit a couple years later and kind of stunted that. So this year I'm back to taking advantage of it. And my wife and dog and I packed up and moved around and decided we're gonna drive around Europe and just explore some different places. So currently spending a couple months up in Germany, spend a few months in other parts of the Alps and France, and then have a little bit of an open road ahead of us as far as what the rest of the year looks like. But just a lot of exploring and getting back to what I love doing, which is just traveling and seeing new places and kind of immersing into different cultures and such. So we'll see. Yeah, I've got a short term plan, I guess.
That's awesome. So, for all the listeners out there who are interested in Spain, living in Spain, obviously we talk a lot about Latin America here at My Latin Life, but Spain is, of course, Latin too. And I think we'll do a bit of a deep dive on Spain and just talk about what it's like to live there. So, if anyone is interested in Spain, this will be the episode for you.
Love it, man. Sounds great. Plenty to share. I mean, it's such an awesome and incredibly diverse culturally and geographically, and just so many different things to love about Spain. And I'm not someone that grew up like in love with the Spanish culture, or, infatuated by going to Spain. I Spain kind of chose me, to be honest, and then I just kind of fell in love with it
Mm.
as time went on. So yeah, man. I mean, I'm more than happy to do that, and I think it'll be a lot of fun.
So, what do you mean by that? That Spain shows you?
Yeah, so I was looking for an opportunity to come to Europe and spend more than just 90 days here. You can get the Schengen visa, which just allows you to hop in and out, but you only have 90 days, and then you have to be out for 90 days. And I was getting tired of doing that, like literally tired. Like I was moving around, digital nomading with a 50-pound Siberian Husky and my wife and her business on the road, and we were like, this is fun, but it's not really sustainable. So we started looking into long-term visas for Europe and found this visa in Spain that worked for us, which is called the non-lucrative visa. And so we applied for it and got it. And really at the time, like we're talking 5-6 years ago, seemed like the only option. It was the only option that I could find that would allow us to come and live for a longer period of time in Europe. I now know that to be false. There are other options. They're just a little bit more obscure, but this one fell into our lap. We said, "Oh, cool! That's our ticket in," and then we got it. So we got the visa. We were able to come live in Spain for a year, and then able to renew it every year after that for up to 5 years. So that's how it kind of chose me. It wasn't as if I was like, I need to go live in Spain. It was more like, I want to go live in Europe. Where can I go?
Hmm.
And Spain picked me in that way.
That's cool. So you've been doing that non-lucrative visa. You've successfully renewed that like 3 times at least.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, so I misspoke a second ago when I said every year. You get it for 1 year initially, and then at the end of that year, you can choose to renew it. If you renew it, it's good for 2 years after that, and then at the end of your third year, you can do it once more, which would get you to 5 years. Which I have done all those things now at this point, and then the next step is to convert to what's called permanent residency, and
No
that so
way.
that's the next step on the path.
That's pretty cool. So the non-lucrative. which is basically kind of like a digital nomad visa. Maybe you could break it down, but that eventually
Yeah.
leads to permanent residency, then, eh?
Yeah, exactly. So there's multiple paths into Spain in that way, and particularly for anybody that's coming from Latin America, it can actually be really easy. Like, as in, if you were like born and raised, if you have a Latin American passport, they actually make it really simple and expedite the whole. You can do that whole process in just 2 years if you're coming
Hmm.
from Latin America.
For sure.
But yeah, I mean the non lucrative visa was designed as a pensioner's visa, like a retiree's visa. So basically they say, okay, you have a fixed income, which for a lot of people would be like their pension or social security, and you want to come live in Spain. You're not going to take a Spanish job because you're not allowed to work with this visa. But you can come here and spend your money. That's cool. The government's happy with that. So they created this visa called the non lucrative visa years and years and years ago. But the times have changed, obviously, and it wasn't really designed for remote workers. It wasn't designed for people that would be working and earning an income from abroad. So now they've come back now and built out an actual digital nomad visa, which unfortunately I just don't know a ton about because I haven't had to deal with it. But what they're
Right.
trying to do now is funnel those types of people, like digital nomads like ourselves, um, into more of the digital nomad visa. And that's a little bit confusing because like there's some gray area out there. It's not like completely built yet, so it's sort of like this plane that's being built in the air that you can somehow kind of get on, but somehow not still. And it depends on the consulate that you're applying from.
Hmm.
So there's some gray area in this space right now.
Interesting. Yeah, and so could you give just like a brief synopsis of what the non-lucrative visa is and how it works so that, anyone out there listening could kind of think about their situation might fit it?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I mean, generally they're looking to make sure that you can support yourself financially. They don't define exactly what that number is, but I've been told somewhere around like 1,800 to 2,200 euros per month, which is roughly the same as dollars right now. Uh, it would be sufficient for an individual, and then like 2,500 to 3,000 for a couple would be sufficient. So somewhere in that range, but it's not clearly defined. They also
Right.
want to make sure you're not some sort of criminal, so you got to do like a background check, and you have to get like some medical paperwork done. They're make sure you're not sick. So you can really just kind of think about it as like they want to know that you're not coming as some sort of burden to the country, that you're basically coming, you're self-sustainable, you have health insurance, international health insurance that will cover you, and you're not a criminal and you're not sick, and that's
Hmm.
about it. There's a bullet point, some bullet points that paperwork things you need to check and fill out and stuff like that and get translated. But all in all, I mean, my wife and I set aside like 6 months to go through the process and get everything. And we kind of took our time with that. I mean, I wouldn't say that was like an exceptionally long, like, we if we could have rushed it, we could have done it quicker. If we could have taken our time and done it a little bit slower, but it's a multi-month process.
Hmm.
And Spanish bureaucracy is not exactly known for efficiency. So, you got to be patient with the process as well.
Right. And so the 2,000 bucks ish a month, is that passive income or can that be earned income? You can just say, look, I have a job. Here's the money hitting my bank account from my remote job. Boom.
More or less, there's not a lot of clear definition around this. So you can actually use all sorts of, and I should also say, like, I'm obviously no expert. Like, this is just my experience, and
Hmm.
it also varies a lot consulate to consulate. Is something I've been told by the actual pros out there. So like, I was applying in DC. If somebody else applying in Chicago or San Francisco might get like a fairly different experience. So that should be known as well. But
Yeah,
I
that's good to point out.
yeah, it's definitely, and
It.
it seems to be more and more the case with this transition to the digital nomad visa. So I think that's very important. But yeah, I mean, basically, you can show all forms of income. So like when we went, we showed our savings accounts, we showed our credit card, like that fact that we had access to credit card state. What it would call it, like credit card debt or whatever. Like I could
Yep.
access $10,000 on this credit card if I really needed to. We showed
Right.
all. We were advised to show all of that. So and I got a letter from my company saying, "Hey, this person's getting paid, and like here's his salary. So we were showing like, hey, look, we have plenty of money to come in and sustain ourselves, and that's the most important thing. That's what they're looking for.
Yeah, I've actually this is the first time I'm hearing about including credit card balances or credit card limits as part of proof of means, but it makes sense because if you have the capacity to take on like 10, 20, $30,000 on a credit card, that does show some ability to, pay bills if access to cash was limited for whatever reason. So I could definitely see that helping. So
Yeah,
another reason to just, have a credit card laying around with zero balance.
yeah, absolutely, man. It's I thought it was weird too. Like at first, I was like, "Is that real? Like that'll actually count for something?" But apparently it did, and they look at
Right. Well,
everything.
because in other countries, they don't really have as much access to credit cards like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly. It's
to
a
to
weird
us,
thing.
to us, it seems like nothing, but in other countries, it's actually a pretty big deal to have maybe a 10,000 limit credit card.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And another interesting thing that you pointed out was that the process can be different depending on what consulate or embassy that you go to. So even within the same country, in the US probably has how many Spanish consulates? Probably
Yeah,
5 at least.
yeah, yeah. I was gonna say somewhere between like 5 and 10. Like if I was gonna
Yeah.
throw a number out, I might say like 8.
And it's definitely been my experience, not only with Spain, but with pretty much any country, that things can change consulate to consulate. So we see a lot of that where people are looking to get visas for Latin America. They're trying to get residency permits for Latin America. And actually, what consulate you go to in the States, the requirements can be slightly different. The lead time, the processing time can be different. So just something to be aware of for people.
Yeah, that's a really good point, I think. And what one thing connected to that is with the non-lucrative visa, you do have to go do an interview in the consulate, so you physically have to travel there. And I've heard some horror stories. Like mine went very. It was super easy. I had to go to DC. I flew up there, did the interview, and it was like not even really an interview. It was more just handing them the paperwork, and they looked at it and they said, come back in an hour and you'll have your visa. But I've heard some people like having to fly from like Denver to LA and then getting there and they were like, oh, you actually need this piece of paper, which you is back in Denver. You didn't know that, but we're telling you now. So then they would have to like come back a second time. So one thing that I found in particular that at least with the DC consulate, and I feel like this is fairly consistent across a lot of them, is like they were really great about communication ahead of time. I had like 100 emails exchanged back and forth, and they were really responsive and very like thorough and helpful. Like I would have expected to kind of get some like automated responder, here's the links you can go to, but I was communicating
Yeah.
with a human who was answering my questions in English. So it was that was pretty awesome.
Yeah, that sounds slightly out of character
Yeah.
for a Spanish consulate. So glad you had a good experience.
Yeah.
Um, so we kind of know each other from Twitter. It actually even says in your profile, like recently returned to Twitter. Uh, when did you return? How's it been going? Twitter's awesome, right? Like, get to
Yeah.
connect with cool people.
Yeah. I got off all social media several years ago, and then a couple years back, like maybe 2 years ago or so, I got a nudge from a my boss, just basically saying like, you should try to have some kind of a digital presence. I get it, if you don't want to really be on it, but it'd be a smart move, long term or whatever, and maybe you'd have some fun with it. And he was right on both accounts. Like I got back on, I was kind of like got past the jaded side of being overwhelmed by social media and some of the like need to share every little thing that's going on, and just looked at it more as a networking tool and a way to connect and share relevant information about like what's going on in my with work and travel and things like that. So I've enjoyed that, and so yeah, just recently, like in the last year, I think got back on Twitter and was just and yeah, man, I'm having fun with it, connecting with cool people like yourself. And I think one of the big motivations in particular with Twitter was like I launched my own podcast called About Abroad, where we talk about like some similar subjects as you do here on My Latin Life. And like the idea was like, well, you do need to meet people where they are, and maybe also I'll find some new information that'll be relevant to share with my audience, and also new guests and things like that. So it turned out that I've just really thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I'm a total newbie.
Yeah, I'll come back to the podcast in a second because that's a topic in and of itself, the about abroad podcast. But just for Twitter for a sec, I mean, I know you talk a lot on there with Mitko. Mitko and I actually have an unreleased episode of the My Latin Life podcast. You talk a lot with Gonzalo Hall, who's another kind of digital nomad advocate in Portugal. Who are some of your top like Twitter buddies there?
That's a good question. I mean, I love what John Lee's doing at Work From Anywhere. He would be an awesome person to have. Perhaps he's in Ireland, so maybe not, maybe not My Latin Life, but I love what he's doing. He shares really relevant
All right.
information.
What's his
Uh,
handle?
Off the top of my head, I type in, I think it's John underscore Lee. Perhaps he's the CEO, founder of a company called Work From Anywhere, which is helping digital nomads navigate like the tax aspect of like where can you actually work, and more so, I think even more helping
Okay. L
companies
E E or
navigate
L
that.
I or how do you?
Yeah, Lee. I think it's John underscore Lee, perhaps. Um, but yeah, and the company's called Work From Anywhere. So I love what John's doing. I mean, there's some really entertaining people out there, like Peter Levels, and
Mm-hmm.
who's always sharing some comical and interesting stuff. I follow a lot of people from, I work at a company called Doist, which is like a remote first team and advocate in and of itself for location independence and such. So we've got some really smart people at the company that I interact with there more than we do at work, actually. So yeah, I mean, it's been great to connect with people like outside of the quote unquote office.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think nowadays like half the podcast guests just come from Twitter. How do you do it? Because you've I think done like 77 episodes. At least that's what I see on my podcast app. How do you how do you organize your guests? Do you do it through Twitter DMs mostly? Do you email them?
So this may be like a really nerdy thing coming from Twitter, but I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Actually, like when I made that return to social media, the advice was like just pick one platform and just do that. Don't overwhelm yourself with many platforms if social media isn't really your thing. So I
Hmm.
was like, oh, I have a LinkedIn account. I think let me open that up. And So I just started on LinkedIn, and then actually ended up, like I said, same with Twitter, kind of having fun with it, and connected with a lot of people there professionally. And so I'm pretty active over there, and I get a lot of requests to be on the show from LinkedIn, and then also I think through my work as the head of remote at Doist, like I'm kind of involved in that remote work world, and so I get to fortunately like interact with a lot of really interesting people, like Gonzalo Hall you mentioned before.
Hmm.
He's been on the podcast before, and I believe we met through some remote work conference years and years ago. I don't even remember. So he's been a longtime friend, and then it's just like natural to bring him on the show and talk about how he's building digital nomad villages in Madeira and and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, you've definitely had a lot of really, really interesting guests. I'm actually scrolling through it right now. I mean, Gonzalo Hall was one of the first episodes. I'll ring off a couple for people just so they can get the idea. Um, Expat life in the Middle East, um, small town to the big city, thriving in Hong Kong. Um, let's see. Um, there's a lot of really, really good ones that I kind of skipped over. There's a lot of like really interesting ones. International taxes made cool. Colombia building a brand. Croatian island life. Living in the Canary Islands and co-living. Life in the French Alps. Nomadic CEO and his family travel the world together. An Austrian in Britain. expat life in Mexico. It just keeps going, and there's like a lot of like really really cool ones. Residency in Estonia. You really covered a lot of the main digital nomad sort of concepts or
Hmm.
niches, be it the countries or the visas or the communities and the nomad hotspots. Moving to Dubai, living tax free here. Um, Traveling to Cape Town, South Africa. Like we can keep going, but there's like a lot. There's a lot here, and you've kind of touched upon everything. Latin America, of course. The most recent episode is a dude from Brazil to Ireland with the founder of eDublin. I'm guessing this guy helps Brazilian people move to Dublin to study and then kind of like get a job and stuff. What do they do there?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, more or less, like he's dude, super interesting. He like moved to from Brazil to Ireland 14 years ago. Started a blog about like what he was experiencing. It turned into a over time into like a massive brand that's got over like I think they've got close to 2 million total followers across all their social media platforms. Their YouTube
Wow.
channel has like 150,000 subscribers or something. It's like a crazy big brand that this guy built sort of on accident, and just also happens to be a super nice guy. Runs community at multiple like big tech companies like Dropbox and Wix, and
Yep.
just fascinating story. And that's kind of the whole idea, like behind the podcast, was really just to say like, there's a big wide world of opportunities out there. I've once thought that I was restricted to just living in my country, and like I would always just have to travel in short stints to other places. And I was like, I kind of want to, now that I'm learning that's not possible. There's all these different ways to do that, to build a life for yourself abroad if you choose to. Some of it, a lot of it through remote work, because that's kind of the low hanging fruit and the easy one to grab. But I mean, I've had people on there that are like, yeah, I took a job as a flight attendant, and they moved me to the Middle East, and I lived in the Middle East for 10 years, and now I'm based in Spain. And or people that took student visas and went and did something, and or whatever. There's all kinds of opportunities, and so it's kind of like part talking about the very like boring kind of practical stuff of like, here's how you do it, here are
Yeah,
the
which is
steps here.
important.
Yeah, which is important. Exactly. Like that's the necessary stuff that'll actually get you there, but also like just the inspiration, like, hey, this is possible. They have a digital nomad visa in Croatia now, and you can just go there, and there's 42 other ones where you can go and live and work if you want. And let's talk about how you do that. So I think a lot like you, man. Like we have that passion for exploring and want to open it up to other people who might think it's not possible.
Yeah, definitely. And when you started the podcast about abroad, so you started it, I think, back in March of 2021. Was it sort of within your company, Doist, or is it sort of separate from that and it's your own thing?
Oh yeah, it's totally separate. It was a side project, just like a a passion project. Like, oh, I love podcasts. I'm probably having these conversations anyway. Like a lot of them are, I'm just genuinely interested in the subject. I'm interested in learning how to make a podcast. And I thought I joked with someone recently. Like I was like, yeah, I thought maybe like my mom, dad, and Nana would listen. And it turned out like some other people chimed in and tuned in as well, but it was started out just as a fun side project. Doist is awesome company that just says like they embrace that there's a life outside of work. You don't have to just slave away at your job and shouldn't have anything else in your life. So they're happy that I have this side project and that I get to enjoy that separately.
Very cool. So you've done 70 something episodes. What do you think you've learned? Like what have been your epiphanies in the podcasting world?
Man, I mean, one of the coolest things, just on sort of a personal note, is like it's brought out this whole creative side of me that I didn't know existed, which I think is one of the great joys of having a side project. Like we're all probably in jobs that we fell into, think we're good at because we develop skills, and we kind of continue down that same path for a long time. And I was not someone that would consider myself creative. Like that wasn't really my thing. My wife is an artist, and so I probably compare myself to her. And I say, okay, like, yeah, I have zero creativity. But creating a podcast is in and of itself a creative outlet, like learning how to be a host and learning how to do the actual behind the scenes stuff, thinking about the marketing and the design and the audio aspects and how you want to structure the episodes and all that. It is like a little bit of an art. And so that's been really like uh, revealing and like and really kind of rounded things out for me. Like my day to day, I enjoy working on it. It's something that brings me a lot of joy in that way. So I think that's been one thing. Like I wasn't expecting that. I've also learned a ton about all the opportunities that there are to do some really cool stuff around the
Hmm.
world, and kind of virtually traveled to some places that I've never been. I had one of my early episodes was like, going like talking to somebody in Abu Dhabi, and like I've never been to the UAE, and I'm just like blown away by what her life is like there. So I've had countless experiences where I'm just like, now, like my bucket list is just continuously growing. So I've learned a ton in that regard. And I think like the third area is probably very like practically speaking a lot about these digital nomad visas. I've tried to do a big focus on those because it's so relevant to the audience. So I've learned a lot about the intricacies of those. I had one guy on that shared like how they're actually built. Like he's worked behind the scenes on like creating them.
Hmm.
Um, so just
Yeah,
looking
who's
at it
that
through
guy?
that
Who's
lens.
who's that guy? It's like he runs like the Digital Nomad Association. That guy, or are you talking about Gonzalo?
Yeah, exactly. This guy's, I mean, completely fascinating, dude. He's
Is
like,
it
he's,
Gonzalo or there's another? I know there's another guy.
sorry, what's that?
Which are we talking about Gonzalo or are we talking
No,
about a different guy?
no. This guy's name is Erkan Munishi.
Uh huh.
And
Uh
he's,
huh.
yeah, so he's worked with like, had him on several months back, in season 4, I believe. He he basically has worked like with these governments on crafting the digital nomad visas in I think like 5 or 6 different countries, and some that still haven't come out yet, some that are already out. But basically, like just the mechanics of like what they're looking for. Some are looking for tax revenue. Some are looking for just like getting bodies through the door, basically like get more people here spending money. Some are looking for people to just be there for 1 year, and there's certain reasons for that. Some want you to be able to extend them to really like integrate into the economy there. So yeah, I mean, just like tons of stuff about these things and like how it actually works, and then how people can actually apply and get their foot in the door.
Definitely. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Spain and just how that's been going. Kind of give people a little bit of a inside vibe into what it's like to live in Spain. How did you settle upon Valencia?
I mentioned before that like Spain picked me. Valencia also picked me, even more so. I mentioned that I had to go to the consulate in DC, right? And
Mhm.
so when I was there, they said like, okay, here we're giving you your visa. You just need to add like on this line like where are you going to live? And we were like, well, we haven't chosen that yet. Like we don't we don't know where we're going to live. We're not leaving for like 6 months. We're just doing the visa stuff now. And she was like, well, to finish this off, like we need to know where you're going to live. And we'd spent some time in Spain before, but we'd never been to Valencia. We'd spent a lot of time down in Andalusia in the south, which is like kind of like going to like the Texas of Spain. It's like what you think of. When people think of America, the U.S., they're like, they think of like Texas
You called it
cowboys.
Andalusia. Andalusia is the Texas of Spain.
Yeah, I would say so. It's like the stereotype, it's like flamenco and tapas and paella and bullfighting and beautiful beaches. And like, so it's kind of like, it's a lot of maybe the stereotype, the equivalent to the cowboy and the rodeo and, big, wide open lands. So anyway, I was just like, we enjoyed that experience like for multiple months before, and we're like, but we want something different. We want like more of a city. And we had a Spanish friend tell us like, if you guys ever come back, you should go to Valencia. I really think you'd like Valencia. So we just randomly said Valencia at the consulate, and yeah, and then put that down. And we thought we'd go for 3 months. Honestly, we thought we'd like go there, we'd be in Valencia for 3 months, and then we'd move on and go somewhere else. But we got there and just were like, this is awesome. Let's just stay the whole year and then that turned into almost 5 years.
Yeah, I actually have a buddy in Valencia. His name is Charlie Headley, the founder of Valencia Nomads. Do you know that dude?
Yeah, man, we do know each other. He's awesome. He's done a great job with that group, and his bar there, Boogaloo and El Carmen, is sweet.
There you go. So you're probably closer to it than me because I know him from Playa del Carmen. He was kind of in the same digital nomad squad in Playa del Carmen. We've hung out together a bunch of times down there. And then he started up this whole Valencia thing, and he started like a cafe. And I guess like what's the cafe about? It's kind of like a normal cafe, but it's just kind of very adapted to digital nomads and working from the cafe.
Yeah, like Valencia is interesting, and I think this is one of the things that's really awesome about it. It's not. It feels very local. Like when you go to Barcelona, for instance, like Barcelona is an amazing city, but you don't necessarily feel like it's very like Spanish still. Like there's tons of tourists, there's tons of expats living there. It feels very like a very international city, which
Hmm.
is awesome in its own way. And sometimes in Valencia you miss that. Valencia feels more traditional, more local. You really like. It's not. I wouldn't expect to walk up into a restaurant and be able to speak English, for instance. And when you're walking around in the streets, you just see a lot of locals. There are other foreigners and stuff, and tourists, of course, but it's on a much lower level. So there's not like a huge, like a strong like a group of expats, nomads. Like there's not like one central place where you meet a lot of them or you hang out. Like it exists,
Except this
but
cafe now, I guess.
yeah, exactly. And so I think Charlie really kind of created that. There, he created this digital nomads group in Telegram, which at one point had like many thousands of people, which was definitely the strongest virtual place to connect with other nomad types, expats there in Valencia. But then he actually created it, like they bought a little restaurant and bar cafe, turned it into a place where it's open to everybody, of course, but it tends to be kind of a central meeting hub for a lot of foreigners living there. So
Yeah.
and they did a great job with it.
Such a perfect example of just like building your tribe. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Just like
yeah,
spin up a little Facebook group, basically, buy a cool cafe so that people can come through. Um, all you need is like a space with an espresso machine and some Wi-Fi, and there you go. You have immediately have a tribe,
yeah,
and people could do this like anywhere in the world. Like I know even places where you think would be saturated, like Mexico or something, a lot of the cities in Mexico could still use something like this, just like like a a little nomad group in a cafe.
yeah, man. I think it changes everything. I mean, it just gives you we're all craving that community. The biggest knock I hear on people, not enjoying the lifestyle is like just not being able to find their community. I've found it to
Hmm.
be really easy, in my opinion. Like it's really easy because you suddenly have something in common with all these people you otherwise wouldn't have anything in common with, or wouldn't know you had anything in common with. But then you're Charlie and I are two people from two different sides of the world, but we're both happen to be expats living in Valencia. That's enough to give us a reason to talk, and then you find out you have a bunch in common from there. So yeah, I think just having that place to go virtually and in person it makes all the difference.
Yeah, that's unreal. So tell us a little bit more about Valencia. Yeah, I guess Valencia versus Barcelona. Like, is it really just the more authentic local version of Barcelona, or how would how would someone from Catalonia sort of describe the difference?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wonder that as well. I mean, I think like the knock on Valencia kind of coming at it from the other angle would be like it's small, it's traditional, it's quiet, like it's comparatively to a Barcelona. I think it's about 1/5 the population of
Hmm.
of Barcelona.
Which
So I
is
mean
still
it's
decent. It's still decent.
yeah.
We're talking
Yeah.
like I don't know, more
It's
than a
still like
half
a
a million
million
people.
person city, it's
Yeah,
it's not
yeah, it's
like
a
it's
sizable
not a
city.
pueblo.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on there. Like for me, it was the perfect balance between being in like a mega metropolis. You get, I mean, there's the cost of living thing. Like you just get a lot more for your money in terms of
Mm.
housing, and then you also have like in Valencia. Valencia is the third biggest city in Spain behind Madrid and Barcelona, and
Oh
so
wow.
it's the third biggest airport. So you get access to like the rest of Europe super easy. Like I could be. This is one of the coolest things to me. I could be at my apartment in the center of the city and sitting at my gate, like not like through security at the airport, sitting at my gate in like 45 minutes, which is just like you'd be on the train that long just to get to the airport from one of the other two major cities. And then you've got long lines of security and stuff like that. It was just super easy. And then I was popping off to, to Italy and to France and Portugal and Canary Islands, like just whenever you want for really affordable. So that was always a big thing for me. And like the other thing is the center of the city is one of those prototypical beautiful European towns that's just got like
Hmm.
cobblestone streets and old architecture, and it's very like windy. It was built as a labyrinth to like for like protective reasons, so it's got these like windy
Hmm.
streets and narrow alleyways and cool tapas bars and like enough liveliness to like keep you entertained, but also just not like a discoteca happening like 24/7 either. So those are some of the things I like about the city itself. And then there are a couple things like aesthetically, like right, like for example, there's a huge 10-kilometer long river that used to run through the city, which flooded. And so they drained it flooded the whole city and destroyed the city back in like the 30s. So they drained it and turned it into this long, beautiful park. They still call it the Rio. So it looks like a river, but it's just all lush green trees, running trails,
Hmm.
dog parks. There's always activities going on out there, and it leads straight out to the beach. So you can kind of be like in the middle of the city, out at the beach, in this big, huge green area. Kind of all really, really close to each other.
Yeah. And how's the beach of Valencia?
The beach is fine. It's not. It's not the reason to come to Valencia. So I know, in my opinion, like some people would say, oh no, it's beautiful. I mean, it's a Mediterranean beach, but like just like an hour south, you get down into these smaller towns like Javia, Altea, Calpe, Denia, towards Alicante, and like those
Yeah.
beaches are insane. Like they're like cliffs, like big high rising cliffs sticking straight up out of the water, like super turquoise water,
Yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah. Where the
white sand
calas are.
beaches. Yeah, yeah, all those calas, like that's like beautiful beaches. So comparatively, like Valencia Beach seems like, oh yeah, it's just a beach. They've got a little boardwalk with a bunch of restaurants and stuff, and you've got the water there. And it is cool for a city beach, but like to get into that like beautiful Mediterranean style that you're probably imagining, I suggest heading like a little south towards they call it the playa the what is it the Playa Blanca.
Sure. Yeah, it's like this peninsula thing that sticks out. Yeah, I bet. I mean, as long as the beach is a little cleaner than the Barcelona beach, then
Yeah.
that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, it's probably like somewhat comparable in a way, but yeah, there's city beaches. Like you're there, like I wouldn't go to Valencia for the beach. I would go for the city and then escape to the beach.
For sure.
If that's what you're really looking for.
Yeah, I spent 2 months living in Barcelona a couple years ago. I never made it to Valencia. I only made it as far as like Tarragona and Reus, but I was trying to. But I that was definitely part of my routine. Is I would just take those city bikes down to the beach, get some sun, pop in the water, and I was
Nice.
working the U.S. time zone, and so if you work for a U.S. company in Europe and you're working U.S. hours, you're kind of working around from around 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. And so it's just perfect amount of time to get up in the morning, have a coffee, bike down to the beach, go chill at the beach, maybe get some errands done, head back, start working.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds perfect, man. That's not a bad schedule at all. I love it. It's a fun lifestyle. Like, and you can enjoy the mornings are active, and people are. That's another thing I really like about like Spain in general is like people are up and active, and like there's you have the stereotype around like the siesta and the afternoons can be a little sleepy. That's true, but Like it's a vibrant lifestyle for sure.
Have you made an effort to learn Catalan or at least Spanish?
Yeah, I speak Spanish, I guess, well now. They in Valencia, they actually have an official language called Valenciano.
Mm.
That's
Which is like a
slight.
dialect of Catalan.
Yeah, I mean, if you say that to a Valencian, they say, no, it's an official language. Catalan would say, what? Valenciano exists? Isn't it just Catalan? So I don't know what the truth is there. I don't speak either. But you don't, it's not like that's a big difference between Valencians and Catalans is like when you're in Valencia, you don't speak Valenciano. Like the road signs are in Valenciano and official paperwork and stuff, but they don't expect you to speak it at all. Whereas, like when you're in Barcelona, you might encounter people that speak Spanish and Catalan, but they refuse to speak to you in anything other than Catalan.
Okay. So I'm reading the Wikipedia for Valencian language. The official historical and traditional name used in the Valencian community to refer to the Romance language, also known as Catalan.
Okay.
I wonder if I
Yeah, I don't.
read the Spanish version, it would say something different.
Yeah, I would love to see it too. Yeah, I mean, on official paperwork and stuff, it says like Valenciano, or if you're talking to somebody, they'll say like, "Oh, drink," like, "Yo, we're gonna no this is in Valenciano." Um,
Okay, so it says in Spanish, it says lengua romance hablada en Valencia, como en Cataluña,
yeah,
Islas Baleares, blah, 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 donde recibe el nombre de Catalán. So I think they are kind of in agreement that it's the same thing.
yeah,
I think one thing that's cool about Valencia is it seems to be like one of the main ports of entry to the, I guess, Islas Baleares. I don't know how they say it, but like
yeah.
to Mallorca and Ibiza and stuff like that. A lot of the ships leave from Valencia, right? More than Barcelona, I think.
Yeah, it's a huge port city. I don't know, like comparatively, like what the exports are, and like and which
Right. I
which one
meant
has
like
more
passenger
routes.
traffic. Like
Yeah,
if someone was gonna go to Valencia, then they could like hop on a little ferry
totally.
to Mallorca or Ibiza, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's super easy to the out to the Balearic Islands, and also like I mean direct flights. Like I would fly to Mallorca in 30 minutes from I think or 40 maybe 40 minutes from Valencia, and there's like tons of direct flights to all those islands every day. But
Hmm.
yeah, you can take the ferries as well. And yeah, they're like that's like the quick escape.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And Valencia is obviously pretty well connected by train with the rest of Spain, right? So Spain has like one of the best train networks. Even Valencia has its own subway system, like below the city.
Yeah.
That seems pretty extensive. It seems like it has a bunch of different lines. And then, I mean, the Valencia Barcelona train must be like pretty frequent as well.
Yeah, they have a fast rail system between like high speed rail system between Madrid, Valencia, and Barcelona. So like you can get from Barcelona to Valencia and vice versa in 3 hours, or to Madrid and Valencia are connected, and I think it's an hour and 40 minutes.
Hmm.
So it's pretty quick, and then yeah, you can take trains the up and down all around the coastline, and I think it gets a little bit like less efficient in the south in my experience, like down in Andalusia for instance, which is like the main southern part of the country.
Hmm.
But like the further north you go, and especially between the major cities, it's really efficient and inexpensive.
Right. And so if someone was looking to base up on the coast in Spain, and you want it to be on the Mediterranean side, which is probably the better side, you know, like there's a lot of small beach towns, but if you want a city of any size, there's not too many options, right? So you
Yeah,
have Barcelona. I guess you could say Tarragona, but that's not really a city and it's quite touristy. And then the very next one is Valencia. And then after that, you got Alicante, you got Cartagena, which are still like quite small and sleepy.
yeah.
You got Almeria as you go down, and then Malaga and Marbella. And so it's basically like It's basically like you almost have the choice between Catalonia or Andalusia, and it's kind of one of the two, unless you want to be in Alicante, kind of in the middle. So you kind of almost have to choose your vibe. Like, are you choosing a Catalonia vibe or Andalusia vibe?
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of my mindset in a lot of ways. Like I when we first went to Spain, I really thought, I wanted to go to Andalusia. I wanted that like traditional Spain. The interesting thing is that area you mentioned down there, like Marbella to Malaga, is the Costa del Sol, which is gorgeous, but unfortunately just totally infiltrated by tourists, and like it's like Little Britain. Like everybody there,
Yeah.
you don't need to speak any Spanish. It just we went and stayed in a small, like beautiful little village for a couple months, and like we're planning to learn Spanish, and I didn't speak a word of Spanish. It was everybody was British, Irish, Scottish, which was awesome in its own way, but like it wasn't the Spanish experience you're necessarily looking for
Hmm.
in that way. So like as you start navigating, as you just did, like up the coast, you start looking at the other options, and yeah, I mean, you get up to Alicante is one option. It's not my favorite place. Like I'm not a big fan of the city. And then yeah, I mean Valencia, Barcelona, and then really like a huge difference between Valencia and Barcelona when you get down to those two, which is exactly what I did. Like, should we put down Barcelona, or we've already done Andalusia? Should we do Barcelona or Valencia? The reason we chose Valencia is because we wanted to learn to speak Spanish and not have it be Catalan as the primary language. We probably still would have learned some Spanish in Barcelona, but I think we were really aided by being in Valencia in that regard.
Mm. So you think Valencia is a little bit less Catalan and a little bit more Spanish than Barcelona?
To be honest, this is the first time I've ever heard somebody refer to Valencia as Catalan. Like they definitely do not in Valencia. It's its own region. Like Valencia is like a
Right, right,
state,
right.
a city, and a county sort of. So they totally like they say we speak Valencian and Spanish, and they would like differentiate themselves from the Catalonians, which might be harder for like outsiders to see. It might seem a little weird, but yeah, totally. Like you you don't like. I never spoke a word of Valenciano or Catalan in Valencia.
Interesting.
Yeah,
All right, let's talk a little bit about prices. I think digital nomads love to know kind of how cheap a place is, blah, blah, blah. And my strong suspicion is that Valencia probably has one of the best like ROIs or value ratios, um, possibly in all of Europe.
yeah,
Because my suspicion is it's quite cheap. Barcelona's already like pretty cheap for an American, and then Valencia, I'm just guessing, is significantly cheaper than Barcelona. And it's a sick city. It's got really really good infrastructure, um, and it's obviously very safe, and it's right on the beach. I like cities that are right on the beach, so kind of seems to check pretty much all the boxes. So like how much I mean I'm guessing since you're a baller, you're probably paying a little bit more than most people, but like what's the average person like paying in rent? What's it cost to go out for tapas? How much does a bottle of wine cost? Stuff like that.
yeah. Good questions. So I mean, I know people that say like they swear you can live on $1,500 a month, no problem. Like all your rent and everything included, and live pretty good.
Hmm.
Um, and I could see that for sure. Like especially if you're like sharing an apartment or something like that. I think for $800 to $1,000 a month, you can have like a really nice apartment in the in a great area of town, with all your bills and stuff covered. I would venture to guess like that's about you might want to double that in a place like Barcelona, but I haven't lived in Barcelona, so I don't 100% know. That's just a gist that I've gotten from talking to other people who have made the move in one direction or the other. And then like when you go out to eat, like when my wife and I go out for dinner, like I'm going to expect to spend like 25 to $30, something in that range, for a handful of tapas and maybe some drinks and stuff like that. So like going out to get a beer is about $2 to $3. A general tapas like to share between two people might be 7 or 8, something like that. Um, One of the major things for Americans is like if you're like kind of more permanently there is the health insurance, which is just crazy, which isn't like specific uh, to Valencia, but I mean like in terms of what we are used to paying in the U.S., like you could pay $75 to $100 a month for like full coverage, like no deductibles, no co-insurance, none of that, which is like impossible to imagine coming from the US. So all those things combined, like I calculated, it's all in all like about half to maybe 2/3 at the most of what I would be spending elsewhere.
Got it. And when you go back to North Carolina, are you surprised how expensive it is?
Yeah, it's so hard to adjust to the mentality. Like I go back and I've tried to protect myself from that as much as I can, but yeah, it's inevitable, man. You go back and you're like, oh, really? Like this isn't even that good. It's really expensive. Um, but but I mean, more than that, even more than like the cost of living is good, but people, you tend to spend what you make and you fill in those gaps. And, so I think whereas like it would be really, really hard to live on $1,500 a month in
In
most
the
of
States,
North
impossible.
America. Yeah. Like, I don't know how you do it in a place like Valencia. It is totally possible. And if you make more than that, then you end up spending a little more. Maybe you got a bigger terrace, or you live in the penthouse or something, or you have a car when you don't really need one, or you travel a lot more.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's totally possible.
I imagine the average local in Valencia is only paying like $400 a
Yeah.
month.
Yeah. I mean, I have local friends there that pay for like 350, 450 a month. And actually, I mean, I know someone who rents like a room in a big house with lots of other people, and I think it's like $100 a month,
Yep.
something like that. So yeah, I mean, you can go as that's outside Valencia. It's in a pueblo, but like you can totally go there and live pretty well. And that's, I mean, again, we're talking about like the third largest city, in the country. Like if you go out to the smaller
Yeah.
towns where a lot of the charm and magic is, um, there can be a lot to discover there for really affordable. And actually, I mean, that's something we should talk about. Is like we've talked a lot about like the Mediterranean coast, but actually, like the Pyrenees are in Spain, and they're incredible. The north side of Spain looks like that's where they filmed a lot of Game of Thrones. There's like crazy cliffs and mountains and green that you don't really think of when you think of Spain. It's actually
Mhm.
like super diverse geographically, and there's some really cool like hidden pockets that are even more affordable and also like maybe even more authentic in a lot of ways.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I never made it up there, but I was hanging out with a bunch of people from Bilbao a lot when I was in
Mm.
Barcelona, I remember. So and
Yeah.
so I learned a lot about kind of that corridor from like Bilbao to whatever it's called on the in the to Biarritz, kind of in like in that
Yeah.
San Sebastian corridor.
Oh man, that area is awesome. I mean, that's Basque country, and like, yeah, I do. When you talk about Spain, like we tend to think about the Mediterranean side and Catalonia, Spanish, all of this, but like, there's also, you have Basque country, which has its own official language and totally different culture and a totally different climate and architecture and everything. You've got Galicia up in the northwest, which has its own language and different. It's more like Portuguese almost. I mean, it's sitting straight
Hmm.
over the north side of Portugal, and is like got landscape that looks like Ireland. Like it's crazy. And so you have all these like pockets where there's like literally there's different languages, there's different histories, totally different cultures and food and stuff, and different weather. I mean, it's pretty wild.
So tell me this, when you're in Valencia, where do you get your fruit and vegetables?
There's a couple little like there's like the Mercado Central, which is just from my apartment, was about like a 5-minute walk away. So
Hmm.
occasionally there's lots of like fruit stands. Like it's a just on every single corner there's a fruit stand. So you go just like pick up a couple quick things there. Occasionally, like at like a regular like supermarket, if you're just like they do have those like the equivalent of our normal supermarket. I had one a couple blocks away. So yeah, I mean, you have your options, but I mean, I prefer to go to like the little local market, get that traditional kind of feel,
Hmm.
talk to the abuela, get my oranges from the same lady. Uh,
And how much better is the food, and how much cheaper is it?
I mean, cheaper is like incomparable. It's I can't even I don't even know what it looks like anymore. Going on like a normal shopping run back home, but I mean, I would expect that it's probably half of what I would spend on groceries, if not more. If not even more significant than that. Um, and yeah, I mean the quality depends on what you're looking for. Like the seafood's really awesome. Coming from the Mediterranean, and uh, I'm vegetarian, so I actually don't eat a lot of like meat. I eat a little bit of seafood occasionally, but like there's people love the jamon and the traditional Spanish food. So yeah, man, you won't be like for wanting if on the food aspect.
Yeah, when I'm back in North America, it's always upsetting that broccoli is $5 for like a little
God.
thing.
Oh man, that's so hard to understand. It's your mind shifts, right? Like you forget what used to be normal.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people really do like to hear about the cost of living and stuff like that, because if you can show them that, oh, you get to live in a picturesque Mediterranean city, amazing trains and this and that, and you get, real organic fruit and vegetables that are not only like clearly objectively better, but they're also like less than half the price. It really, once you start stacking all these little benefits, you start Americans, I think, really in the past year have really started saying, "Why the hell do I not live in Europe?"
Yeah. Yeah, man. I mean, something that's interesting, it would be interesting to talk with you about on that note is like, so I didn't really know, like, I thought of Spain as like, before coming to Spain for the first time, like thought of it as like Europe. And I thought generally Europe is kind of expensive. And so when I was like first starting out on my digital nomad journey and like on a pretty tight budget, my mindset was to go to Latin America. And I went to Latin America and then eventually made my way to Spain. And like I had already traveled a decent amount in Europe before that. Um, and so I had this mindset that like, I'm just going to need to like really figure out how to make it work. But I was shocked that Spain was basically more. I mean, when I added up my expenses, like it was on par with Latin America, and in some ways even like cheaper.
Hmm.
And that was kind of mind blowing, and a pretty special thing about Portugal and Spain compared to like I'm in Germany now, and like it's much more expensive. Like just your day to day, your grocery store run when you go out to dinner or whatever, it's much more expensive. But anyway, I think that's something like worth mentioning. Like uh, yeah, it's European, but it's not necessarily like the same cost of living as you get in other parts of Europe.
Yeah, I mean, Southern Europe is surprisingly cheap. I think some people don't see it because they'll go in high season when the hotels are expensive, and they'll go to very touristy areas. But if you're just living a normal life in a normal Mediterranean city, it's unbelievably cheap, and often even cheaper than Latin America. I think one of the big differences is in Latin America, you do kind of have to stay in a high end area, especially if you don't speak Spanish well, because um, you're basically in Latin America. I would say it's just good to pay a little bit of a premium for safety and for walkability.
Yeah.
Um, but in Europe, you could live out in the middle of nowhere, out in, a half hour from the city center, and it's still going to be safe. So if you like truly needed $100 rent, you could go do that in Latin America, no problem. Or sorry, you could do that in Europe, no problem. Where in Latin America, you better know some people.
Yeah, 100%. I had a friend visiting from LA who had just he and his wife had just spent like a year and a half traveling through Latin America. They love Latin America. Like that's where they would like to like be. I know it's a very broad statement. I don't know exactly where, but they're just like, we love Latin America. That's their thing. And they're and so they just spent like a year and a half traveling around Latin America. They were back in LA, and he came to visit me in Valencia. And my wife was riding off like on her bike in a different direction at like 10 p.m. at night, and we were going in another direction. And he was like, "Dude, you're okay with this? Like, like shit." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I forget that's like a thing, like danger." I no, I'm totally okay with it. It's you're very safe here, and in the middle of a major city, and 10 o'clock at night or whatever. It's yeah, you just kind of stop thinking about it. It feels extremely safe, and that's something
Mhm.
that I don't want to take for granted, but it is very true.
Yeah. So, talking about safety, I was gonna make a joke here, but um, talk about safety. Let's talk about immigrant groups in Spain. I'm just joking because I was curious if there's a presence of a particular like Latin American country in Valencia. If like have you noticed like are there more Colombians or are there more Guatemalan people or something like that? Because I have noticed that different cities in Spain, people from different countries or regions tend to congregate a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of Venezuelans. I mean, it's one of the greatest mass exoduses in the world, I guess. So it's not super surprising. But in Valencia, in particular, I know a ton of Venezuelans that were all being, I feel like, from what I understand, getting a pretty warm welcome. I'm sure there's plenty of cases that say otherwise, and there's some outliers there, but yeah, a lot of Venezuelans in particular, and then in Argentines, there's a good bit of Argentines as well.
Okay, interesting. There's
Yeah,
actually a major city in Venezuela called Valencia.
yeah. That's is there? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
I met a lot of people from there and learned a good bit about I've never been, so I learned a good bit about Venezuela. One of my first episodes on the podcast actually was with my friend who kind of had to like escape Venezuela, and remote work kind of like saved him and his family by getting him this opportunity. But I mean, it's crazy what's happened there, just with the hyperinflation and horrible management by the government. And I mean, just I know some people who have some pretty sad stories. Kids who are living over here now, 20-something-year-olds, and their parents are back there, and
mhm.
so it's
Yeah, I met a
one thing.
lot in Barcelona because a lot of them would either have Spanish or they'd have an Italian passport, and that would kind of get them over to Europe.
Yeah.
So I think I met like a whole squad of Venezuelans, and they all just had Italian passports.
everybody's 1% Italian. You get a passport.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that was one of the biggest realizations I had when I spent my time in Barcelona was just that how many Latin Americans were there because I met people from literally every Latin American country, and so like it was crazy. You'll see people from Argentina, people from Honduras, people from Ecuador, like literally everything, and they're all kind of like living together in Spain, and they all kind of have a bit of a bond. And to be fair, like I mean, it probably is worth noting that some of them do have like dubious like immigration status. I remember I had to go to Italy after Barcelona, and I wanted this girl to come with me. I was like, "Baby, come to Napoli, blah blah blah," and she's like, "No, I can't get on a plane." She's like, "I have to stay in Spain. I'll take a train maybe." But I'm not getting on a plane. I was like, "Oh, true, I forgot." And I met so many people, and what they would do is they would like they'd get like an education visa and they'd come to Spain for university or whatever it is and get like kind of like a 2 year thing and then they would just stay and they
Yeah.
would just stay and then they've been in Spain for like years and years. Um,
Dude,
Not to say that's good or bad or whatever, but just pointing out like a
I
very very common dynamic.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt it. It's just it reminded me. It was so funny. I met an American guy who, like, his mom had moved to Spain 30 years ago or something, and he lived in, I want to say, like, lived in Miami. And he's like, "Yeah, I just hop over here all the time. Come see my mom." And it's like, stay, for 6 months. I stayed for a year one time. Blah. And he's just going on. We're like, "Oh, okay. So you just how'd you figure that out? Like, do you get some kind of visa for that?" And he's like, what do you mean? And like, he's like, I just come in the country, and I'm like, but yeah, but you can't stay past 90 days. He's like, huh, never knew that. Uh, and he'd done it plenty of times. So it's kind of the joke is like the immigration is pretty lax. Like I've heard people say, like, if you're going to enter and exit with a dubious visa situation, like Spain is probably a safe bet to do that from. But so I think a lot of people do, and it's just kind of like, I mean, I've walked through customs so many times with like my documentation out ready to go, and they just like grab the passport, stamp it, and you walk right by. They don't even look. So
Dude,
take that for what
Spain,
it's worth.
dude, Spanish police, I have no idea what's going on. I don't know if I should tell this story, but when I was living in Barcelona, I was hanging out. I kind of made friends with a group of people, with a group of graffiti artists. And so they were all graffiti artists. Barcelona's a big graffiti hub. And they're all into art and all stuff like that. And they were even so intense that they were the type of guys that would they'd go in the subway tunnels and they would like do art in the tunnels and they'd be like going around the subway system and stuff like that, which in a normal country would be like a pretty big offense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so what they would do though is if they ever got caught by either the transit police or by the normal police while painting the streets, is if they ever got caught, they would just put on their French accent and they'd start kind of speaking French, and then they'd be like, "Look, I'm a foreigner, blah blah blah. I'm just on vacation," and then the Spanish police would basically just let them go because they're like, "Oh, I don't want to deal with this foreigner and all the paperwork that it takes." And so they would just let them go. And I heard about this happening like several times. So it
I mean, I overstayed a Schengen visa one time on accident. I had I'm a camper van guy, and I had a camper van years ago that I bought in Spain and drove. This is on like a previous stint in Europe, and drove it. Was planning on driving it all around Europe, but it ended up being a complete catastrophe. And like engine blew up. Everything that could go wrong with this van did. And so I ended up on this. I had like 8 days to get to the north of France to catch a ferry to leave the Schengen area. And instead, my this van just kept breaking down, and it took like over 40 days. So I get to the French border and like have to get on this boat with the van, and there's like 8 French border patrol police like inspecting the vehicle and looking at all my documentation. And then they were finally just like, okay, you could go on. And I was like sweating bullets, like thinking, oh, I'm going to French jail for sure. And I had a good excuse and story to back it up in case, but who knows? I didn't know how that would go, but they didn't notice, and on we went, and you know, life went on. But
Yeah. So long story short, Spain's actually like pretty chill from like an authority and rules perspective.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I think it's pretty chill in a lot of different ways. The downside to that is like it leaves a lot of gray area. So like you don't know. Sometimes you just don't know where the rules stand, and you think people are going to be relaxed about something, and then you find like you don't. They're not, and or the rule says like, oh yeah, it's this or that. It gives you kind of a gray area to work with, but you're not quite sure if you where you stand in that gray area. So that can also be a slight downside. But generally, I mean, I love the vibe. I love the tranquilo mentality. They definitely live that vibe.
For sure. So yeah, I had a question about what would happen once you get your permanent residency. Would anything about your personal planning change, either from like a tax perspective or a where you're going to live perspective? I guess from there you could maybe once you're a permanent resident in Spain, that probably finally opens up more travel opportunities within the Shenzhen. What do you think the permanent residency is going to change about your life?
Yeah, so there's two options you can do when you transition to permanent residency. There's one called the EU Larga, like the Larga Duración. So like you can
Long
become
duration.
a yeah. So you basically like become a EU resident through Spain, or there's the Spanish Larga Duración, which is like you just become a long term resident of Spain. The process is not that much different, but it's slightly more challenging to get the EU Larga.
Hmm.
But with the EU Larga, you actually have the ability to change countries. Like with either, of course, you can just travel anywhere within the Shenzhen as much as you want. But to actually like establish yourself and live and maybe get work or something like that, you're limited to Spain unless you get the EU version. So I'm going for the EU version, so I have the options. And then yeah, then I don't know. I mean, we're kind of evaluating different opportunities if we want to try living in other countries or stick with Valencia and Spain. It's sort of like there's not really a lot of reason to leave and change, and at the same time, it's it's a big world and kind of want to experience other places. So yeah, I don't know what it'll change yet. We've got that's I think part of the experience this year is just like traveling around, experiencing some new places, spending some significant time in a few different countries and learning a bit of
Hmm.
the language and seeing how we vibe. So yeah, we'll see. It's a big question mark for me right now, honestly.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. I know that for healthcare, there's like a national healthcare card, and then you can get like an EU wide healthcare card as well.
So something I did. There is like Spain has a great national healthcare system. I've had Spanish people tell me it's one of the best in the world, and I don't hear many people complain about it. Um, but on the visa that I'm on, I don't have access to it. Like that's one of the quote
Right.
unquote downsides of the.
So that'll change.
Yeah, so that will be something that changes. So I have private insurance, but that said, like I know a lot of people that have private insurance, and because it is so inexpensive and it does like expedite things for you, even for like Spanish locals, a lot of people will get it anyway. But that covers you throughout Europe as well. So that's noteworthy, I think.
Right, right, right. Yeah, I've been looking into the Portugal programs, and they were telling me like, oh, okay, we can get you your Portugal healthcare card very easily, but if you want to get the European healthcare card, it's just going to take a couple more weeks on the
Okay,
ground and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, okay, well, I probably want that European one,
that's
so
cool.
that when I go to Germany, like yourself, I'll be good, etc.
Oh, that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
that's huge.
And then, like, I assume you don't have a driver's license yet in Spain, or do you?
I do. I had to go through the process of doing that. After 6 months being in the country, your home driver's license is no longer valid, and
Right.
so I actually got a ticket. That's one of those funny things. Actually, it's what I was thinking of when I talked about the gray area. Like, yeah, that's written in the rules, but everybody says like, yeah, well, the Spanish police aren't going to care about that. Well, they did when I got pulled over, and they gave me like a pretty hefty fine for not having the right driver's license anymore because I'm a resident of Spain, so I should have a Spanish driver's license. And it's not an easy process. I went through. It took me many months. I had to go back to driving school and pass all these tests and pay all this money. And anyway, eventually got it, but it was a bit of a pain.
Mm. And when you get the permanent residence, do you think you need to update the driver's license to like reflect your status? I would assume so.
No, because it's two different cards. Like they look really similar, but the identity card so I have
No, I
like
know it's a
a
different card, but I think your driver's license probably says like resident foreigner or something on it.
I
And
don't
then
I
there's
don't
probably like an updated version of the driver's license that has like a newer status. This is just a guess.
Yeah, it could if it is. I'm not sure. They told like the rule is you have to. It's good for 10 years, and then that's the standard is that it's good for you just renew it every 10 years. But and as far as I know, it doesn't say anything about uh my like immigration status or whatever. But it may. And I'm
Okay.
just not sure. I don't have it on me, or else I'd pull it out right now.
Okay. And let's do a couple more questions around sort of residency and citizenship there. Um, so you've been in Spain for like 4 or 5 years now. Uh, these years under the non-lucrative visa, do they count towards citizenship as time on the ground?
They do. Yeah.
Unreal. So you must pretty much be there. It sounds like you'll probably be getting PR and citizenship around the same time because I'm guessing citizenship is 5 years.
So it's 10. So it's like
Oh,
5
is it?
years. Yeah, so it's I mean, and this could be different for different categories, but at least in my case, it's 5 years of what's it called? Temporary residency, 5 years of permanent residency, and then citizenship after that.
Okay. Yeah, that does kind of ring a bell that Spain is a little bit longer.
But I think for Latin Americans, like anybody coming directly
It,
from Latin America, it's like super
yeah,
expedited.
it's like 2 years or something.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Okay. And so is the rule for the permanent residency, it's like 5 years of temp and then you get PR?
Correct. Yeah. As far as I understand, I mean that's in my situation, that's the case. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And
It's
is the PR, is it like sometimes a permanent residency isn't like permanent and it needs to be renewed every, let's say, 5 years or something like that. What do you know about sort of the renewal process of the PR?
yeah, that's my understanding as well. So it's basically PR is good for 5 years, and then you have to that the next time you go in is when you would be going for citizenship, and or if I understand correctly, you don't necessarily have to go the citizenship route. You could just continuously extend the permanent residency.
Hmm.
Um, so and that's everything I've been told is like that's not even really like a that's kind of like the equivalent of like renewing your driver's license in that it's not like a question, it's more of just like turning in your card and getting a new one sort of.
Yeah.
So that's uh that's something like I didn't really understand that because I've had to go through all these visa renewals in other countries and in Spain, and like it's a question mark, like you're not guaranteed, even if you do everything correctly. So that was pretty that was heartwarming to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you do Spanish citizenship? Would you naturalize?
Uh, I mean, I've got some time to think about it. I don't have any like,
Yeah.
I don't
5 years
have,
to think about it.
yeah, I got a little bit of time. I don't have anything against it. I just don't know that I like, I don't feel like super compelled to go through that process if it's going to be, um, cumbersome, but I don't have anything against it either. I honestly haven't even looked into it.
The only issue that I'm seeing here, at least according to Wikipedia, is that foreign nationals who acquire Spanish nationality must renounce their previous nationality unless they are natural born citizens of a Latin American country, Andorra, the Philippines, Equatorial Guinea, or France.
Yeah.
So you may have to renounce. The thing about renunciation in the context of naturalization is that sometimes it's just a symbolic gesture and it
Mm.
has no meaning in the home country. This is especially true as an American, where you cannot renounce American citizenship unless you do it before an American authority, basically in an American consulate. So when Americans naturalize in a foreign country, and a lot of naturalization programs, they do say that you need to renounce, that you have to make like sort of like an oath of renunciation. But the US, I guess Supreme Court or whatever, the US body has repeatedly stated that that oath has no effect, um, regarding your US status unless it was like truly done in front of a US authority.
Interesting. Okay, I literally never knew anything about that, but just assumed anything around renunciation was probably off the table. So that's that's really good for me to know.
Yeah, and it makes sense, right? Like if you just go to Spain and say, "I promise to renounce," like I promise to be Spanish, um, like that doesn't mean anything to the U.S., right? Unless it's on like a U.S. piece of paper, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So I think you should, if that's going to be, your first, like your first foreign passport, your second passport, 100%. If you're going to be spending time in Spain,
Yeah.
um, there might even be a way to uh, speed up that timeline if you have kids in Spain. What is your situation with that, by the way? Because you're married, you said, right? I think you said you have a dog as well. What's
Yeah.
what's the family unit plan?
Yeah, it's a great question. I on my like personal situation, it's my wife and I. We've been married for a while, and we have our almost 10-year old Siberian Husky. That's our current kid. He's close enough to a kid in a lot of ways. He's pretty demanding, and we're at the stage in life where we're trying to decide if and when the we grow the family. So the one thing we have looked into in like regards to Spain is that it is interesting that in Spain, if the kid is born in Spain, it doesn't automatically give him or her Spanish citizenship. There is, I don't know the details. I can't go much deeper than that, but that is not, as a foreigner, as a foreign couple, just
Hmm.
having the kid in Spain does not give the kid any rights to a Spanish passport necessarily.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. I don't know how important that is for others, but we found that kind of interesting.
I think and I think it also makes sense as probably like the number one or number two most visited, most touristed countries on the planet, which
Yeah.
is Spain, that they would kind of limit that a little bit. I think if you had permanent residency, I think even with your temp, that could be helpful. But I think if you had permanent residency and it was a permanent resident having the kid, I think that actually changes the dynamic quite a lot and would make it easier.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
And worst case, for some reason, it seemed not doable. I don't see why not, because I think some of the other rules are that you have to like stay in Spanish territory for like, 5 years before the kid turns 10, or something random like that. But it sounds like that's probably going to be the case anyway. Like as long as the kid stays there for the first like 2 years. I don't know the exact number, but you can look it up and sort of do some life planning based on that. Um, but I think that would work. And then your other option would be like, you're already in the Eurozone. I'm sure there's some European country where it is where it works like that,
Yeah.
based on birth. So you could easily just pop over to Poland or wherever they do it, and they're still going to be an EU citizen. So it doesn't really matter all that much at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's a great point, man. Yeah, I think it's smart to have, times are weird. Like you don't know what the future holds, and it does not hurt to have a second passport if you can finagle it.
For sure, because your kid will be American regardless, even if they're not born in the US, because you're American. You do what's called a consular report of birth abroad, CRBA. So you're just going to do that form. And if you want them to be American, they'll be American. So there's obviously there's, personal reasons you might want to do it in the States so that, your parents can be there and the fam and all that. But from a citizenship perspective, there's really no benefit to doing it in the States. And actually, it's better to do it not in the States. It'd be better to do it in Europe. I think one of the other things that's cool, I think I mentioned this on a podcast before, but the best version of American citizenship is an American that was not born in the States. And I'll tell you why.
I'm
So,
curious.
okay. So we know that as Americans, we are penalized in a couple different ways. It makes it a little bit more difficult to open international bank accounts. Um, there are certain ways where being an American is a little bit penalized. You know this, right? Because there's
Yeah.
FACTA, and some banks don't allow American citizens, and there's other sort of like just different uh, encumbrances that happen, sort of similar to that. So but we know at the end of the day, it's still also good to be American, right? There's obviously benefits, high salaries, still a decent country, blah, blah, blah. So the best version of being an American is an American that wasn't born there. And the reason why is that if you look, let's just say your kid, Chase Jr., is born in Spain, right? We'll
See how it
call him
sounds.
Casa. You should name your kid like Cazador, which would be like chaser, chaser in Spanish. Um, sorry. So so let's just say Chase Jr. is born in Spain. If you looked at his passport, it would not say U.S. citizen on it. It would just say Spanish citizen on it, right?
Yep.
But yours, if you had a Spanish passport, it's going to say born in USA from America, right? On your Spanish passport. That's what it would say. And so if you went to, let's just say, a European bank and try to open up a bank account and they ask for your passport, you give them your Spanish passport. They look at your birthplace. They go, "Oh, you're born in the United States." And you go, "Yeah." And they go, "Sorry, we don't open accounts for Americans."
Hmm.
But for him, for Chase Jr., he goes to open the bank account. All it just says is born in Spain, Spanish passport. He can open that bank account much easier. So, long story short, the best type of American is like a secret American.
Dang, man, that's genius. Oh man, I mean, I'm sure people out there listened and learned a lot. I definitely did, and I've like studied this stuff a lot. Like it's not my skill set. I'm not a pro on this on the tax, finance stuff at all. But like you kind of have to become at least an amateur one when you do this for enough
Mm-hmm.
time. And
Mm-hmm.
but I just learned a lot. I mean, you got a wealth of knowledge on this stuff, so that's awesome.
Yeah, being a digital nomad is definitely a rabbit hole, and
Yep.
there's definitely a lot to learn.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. I could continue picking your brain on that stuff for a while because it's super valuable, and it's how you make this thing sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Looking forward to collaborating with you in the future, Chase. Maybe I can hop on an episode of the About Abroad podcast. That's Chase's podcast that I encourage everyone to go check out.
Yeah, man, we'll get you on there for sure. I'm sure you got a story of your own to tell. So thanks for letting me tell a little bit of mine today and talk about España. It was just a lot of fun. It's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell people where they can find you. What's your Twitter handle?
I'm at DC Warrington on Twitter and Instagram, and that's mostly like a little bit of podcast stuff, a little bit of personal life stuff. And on LinkedIn, you can find me Chase Warrington. I talk about a lot of remote work things there. My day job is head of remote at a remote first company called Doist, and my job is to kind of like make sure that remote work works, and talk about how we do that as a globally distributed team. So I talk a lot about that stuff there on LinkedIn. And then the podcast is aboutabroad.com. You can find it everywhere where you find your podcasts, but the website's got all the information, aboutabroad.com.
The kid from North Carolina, Chase Warrington.
Thanks for having me, man. It was awesome. I had a really good time.